Hello, everybody. I thank you for tuning in. In an attempt to continue real dialogue, ask my fellow citizens to engage in real and important conversation. I am trying to encourage all of us to look beyond mainstream media for the truth. I feel like right now there's two things. I feel like we are attempting to hang on to the greatest of all time written document by man, and that is the U.S. Constitution. I feel like we're trying to hang on to that to the best that we can, and it's a battle. And I also feel like we use tech. We need to use tech to fight this, what I would call, again, if we're going to start creating three-letter acronyms, the Animal Farm Syndrome, the AFS. Now, I'm going to get into that a little bit deeper at a different time. But it was a mandatory reading, and we should look at this and really, really consider it. I want to thank you for subscribing, those of you who have. And if you are a subscriber and you do like the content, please encourage somebody else to subscribe. And also thank you for viewing, and please share it with at least 5 people. I want to get into the big lie. The big lie has been around for a long time. Hitler used the big lie. Our government has used the big lie on multiple occasions. And Dinesh D'Souza, he's a Dartmouth grad, and it was Obama's America documentary that he made. And then he made Hillary's America. And I actually liked the guy a lot. I liked the truth in which he spoke of in Hillary's America, but it was really central around this concept of the big lie. And the big lie has been so damaging to our constitutional republic. And so one of the articles that I wanted to share with you today is David Hassani, and it says, quote, "It is reasonable to assume that the vast majority of Americans process news and data, can calculate that self-quarantine, wearing masks, and social distancing makes sense for themselves, their friends, and the country. Free people act out of self-presentation, but they shouldn't be coerced to act through authoritarian whims of the state. Yet this is exactly what is happening. There has been much pounding of keyboards over power grabs of authoritarians in Central and Eastern Europe, and rightly so. Yet right here, especially in Michigan," that's my added, "politicians act as though a health crisis gives them license to lord over the most private activities of the American people in ways that are wholly inconsistent with the spirit and the letter of the Constitution." That's the opening paragraph, and I thought, well, I got to read this article. So let me get into this just a little bit and break down some of these things, because he does talk about where we left our liberties and the Constitution, where we left them. And here's an example. Local Brighton, Colorado cops handcuffing a father in front of his family for playing softball with his daughter in an empty park. We left the Constitution when we have 3 Massachusetts men being arrested and facing the possibility of 90 days in jail for crossing state lines and golfing, a sport built for social distancing, actually, in Rhode Island. There is no reason to close public parks where Americans can maintain social distance while getting some air or space for their mental and physical well-being, or maybe see a grandchild from afar. In California, surfers who stay far away from each other are banned from going in the water. Elsewhere, hikers are banned from roaming the millions of acres of national parks. Millions of lower income and urban dwelling Americans don't have the luxury of backyards, and there is absolutely no reason to inhibit their movement either. 2 days before Easter, Mayor Greg Fisher of Louisville, Kentucky, attempted to unilaterally ban drive-in church services for the most holy day in Christianity. It's one thing if people are purposefully and openly undermining public health. The constitutional right to assemble peacefully and protest or practice your religion, however, is not inoperable in the presence of a pandemic. Would-be tyrants such as the Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins, who implores residents to rat out neighbors who sell cigarettes for putting profits over public health, forget that we are not ruled by him and that he is merely a temporary servant. Yeah, we're at war, all right, but that doesn't change the Constitution. And as a matter of fact, if we are at war, didn't we have to get a declaration? Can it just be an authoritative declaration by our president? Haven't we seen this before? There is a great deal that I read every day. I try to watch less of the mainstream media. I try to watch less of the things that seem to keep telling me the same old lies. One of the articles that I read, and it was out in the last day or so, and the gentleman's name is Porter Stansberry, and I just am so impressed with so much of what he has to say, and it seems to come true. A lot of it is it just seems like when I read this, and I've been saying a lot of this stuff over these past couple of weeks, and that phrase, what common sense, it's too bad it's not more common. It's too bad that it's so uncommon, right? So he was talking about this particular crisis and talking about this big lie. So I'm going to read through this at different points and kind of inject some of my thoughts. He says, "We are going through the greatest mass delusion in history. Never in my life have I ever been more ashamed of our elected officials, and never in my wildest dreams did I think our entire country would fall for such complete nonsense on such an enormous scale." I mean, if you think about what he just mentioned there, it's true. How is it possible that and I'll use as Michigan as an example, how is it possible that we can deem things in the First Amendment as now being unessential and or illegal to participate in? And I think that this is much deeper than a pandemic, a virus. And again, I respect the virus. I do not fear the virus. So let's get some facts to inform a point of view from Porter. I would like to review how completely inane and idiotic our political leaders have become in the midst of this health problem. My favorite example so far, the thousands of outdoor recreational activities that have been closed or forbidden, including those that involve individual pursuits like surfing. And what did CBS News publish as a headline above the story documenting a surfer being chased down by patrol boats? It read, quote, "Scientist says beaches are dangerous right now." How does anyone read that stuff and not laugh out loud? It's impossible to watch the video of a surfer being chased down by patrol boats in the name of public health and not think something has gone terribly wrong in America. Again, the common sense tells us he's right. And we've been thinking this for some time now. And what happened in Lansing, the lack of empathy by Governor Whitmer shows that it's a politically motivated decision to keep people from mowing lawns, landscaping. We can't, so frustrating to walk through the store today. We can walk through the store today. We can walk through Menards, Home Depot, Walmart. You just can't purchase a lawn chair, something to sit out on your deck. You can't do it. Back to the article. At the heart of every mass delusion, there's a big lie. The big lie is a falsehood, so outrageous and so obviously wrong. In retrospect, people can hardly believe that anyone took it seriously. Now I'm going to stop right there. If you look back at the body of work in this podcast, and I have taken a great deal of criticism about saying there are people dying, this isn't over, it's far worse than it is. And I said the same thing I usually do, and that is maybe. Maybe it is. Let's see. Time's going to tell us exactly what it is, exactly what the truth is. Back to the article. The most famous example of the big lie is the Salem witch trials, where 4 bored teenage girls convinced their pastor they were possessed by the devil and that dozens of people in their community were agents of Satan. The pastor in turn convinced most of Massachusetts that the colony was inundated with witches. Even though it's hard to imagine today, some 200 people were arrested over the next year. One poor man, Giles Corey, was crushed to death under a pile of giant rocks because he wouldn't confess to being a witch. And what happened to those who did confess? They were forced to name more witches. Then they were hanged. Before anyone came to their senses, 30 people were put to death. I want to stop right there. Let's get back to that judge in Dallas who's encouraging residents to rat out other residents. And we have a bunch to get to that Porter's going to mention, but we know people right now in the state of Michigan that have had the police called on them at a time like this. Now, for the most part, Michigan residents, the citizens of America, have shown up big time and shown their generosity and caring for your neighbor. We've done that. But some of these things that we're getting into here, when you're encouraged by authorities to call the police because that guy's not mowing his own lawn, he's got somebody doing it. Please. So we, modern Americans, look back at the events 200 years ago in Salem and we think, well, we wonder how anyone could have taken seriously a bunch of teenagers prattling on about witches and devils. But don't be too proud. A court in Arkansas sent 3 teenage boys to prison in 1994 for murders they couldn't have possibly committed, mostly because the jury firmly believed they were devil worshippers and thought they'd use black magic to pull off their crime. And with COVID-19, Americans have become just as irrational as those Salem witch hunters and that Arkansas jury. What's the big lie today? The big lie today is that we're all in this together. I'm going to stop right there. It takes a village to raise a child. We've been hearing that, especially in academia, and it sounds great. We've been hearing that for the last 40 years. It takes a village to raise a child. Well, that's part of breaking down what the truth is and getting our minds ready for the next aspect of that. And we can have a separate discussion about the things that I just mentioned, about helping out your neighbor and about being there for somebody else and loving your neighbor as yourself. We can talk about all those things because they're valid too. But I'm talking about we're all in this together. Let's break this down. Back to the article. It's utter nonsense. We, the people of the world, the people of our country, of my state, and of this city, he lives in Baltimore, and even the people in my neighborhood, do not share the same values, ideals, or circumstances. We do not have anything like the same immune systems or face the same risks of the virus. And I want to stop right there. Even my 2 brothers and I would have as close to the same genetic makeup, and even my kids, I guess, that would be the closest thing, our immediate family. And yet, my experiences in life, the toxins, the chemicals that I've been exposed to are different than either one of my brothers. And so, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. And in the law of large numbers, there might be some similarities, but even my own 2 brothers are not going to be handling viruses such as this in the same way. He is spot on. Back to the article. Well, it might sound friendly to say we're all in this together. The reality is that we are not. And enforcing policies that treat all of us the same is the very worst approach we could take to dealing with this health crisis. Some of us are at a much greater risk of serious harm by the virus. Some of us are much more susceptible to infection. Some of us own businesses or work for companies that haven't been impacted at all. Others have seen their livelihoods, their careers, or even their life savings wiped out. We are not in this together. As with everything else in our lives, our abilities and our priorities and the risks we're willing to take are all different. We are individuals, not a monolithic polity. Saying we're all in this together sounds like Mao's China, where people abandon the cities to die from starvation on communal farms. It seems like a disaster in the making because it is. Rather than assessing our own risks and our own priorities and then making our own decisions, we have decided to allow the government, the state, really just a handful of governors and the president to make one decision for all of us. And we're told not following the rules means we're putting other people's lives in jeopardy. It's complete and utter nonsense. What's putting all of us in jeopardy is the idea that Washington, D.C. knows best and we could follow directions because we're all in this together. Adolf Hitler, in his book Mein Kampf, explained why such big lies are at the foundation of all tyranny. If you want to understand how despots operate, you should consider how one of the worst in history manipulated large groups of people. Now, we already mentioned Mao, who by far, he killed many, by all accounts, somewhere between 8 and 10 times more of his own people than Hitler killed. And Stalin killed probably 4 or 5 times more people than Hitler did. But Hitler, he gets a lot of press for being the bad guy. He's just one of them. In Mein Kampf, quote, "In the big lie, there is always a certain force of credibility, because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted in the deeper strata of their emotional nature than consciously or voluntarily. And thus, in the primitive simplicity of their minds, they more readily fall victims to the big lie than the small one." End quote. Not only are we not in this together, we shouldn't strive to be either. The strength and resilience of a free society is not based on the idea that we are all the same or should share the same goals, but upon precisely the opposite. And let me just say, part of that big lie has been, again, it takes a village to raise a family, we're all in this together, has also been going on is that when we started giving out trophies, participation trophies, it doesn't mean we need to find a winner. We just want to celebrate and give everybody the participation trophy. And I forget the football player now, when he saw his kid's trophy participation and he broke it when he got out to the car. It is important that we recognize successes, and we should not put everybody in the same category and expect the same outcomes. Opportunities should be there, but not outcome based. Back to the article. A free society recognizes a fundamental truth of nature. We are not the same. We do not have the same strengths, the same ideas, the same histories, or the same goals. There's no such thing as the public good. There's a myriad of competing interests, as Adam Smith explained in The Wealth of Nations more than 200 years ago. What we do share, however, is a common philosophy that champions the rights of the individual and limits the power of the state. Let me read that one more time. What we do share, however, is a common philosophy that champions the rights of the individual and limits the power of the state. We do not exist to serve the state. The state exists to serve us. That distinction lies at the very heart of what it means to be an American. And I think our leaders have completely forgotten this fact. Now, let me just stop again. The number of legal immigrants that I've had conversations with love that paragraph right there. They love the fact they come to this country because it was different. And it was different mostly based on that paragraph right there. Their understanding. They learned how to speak English. They studied the Constitution. They understand exactly what that paragraph is talking about. And we, as American citizens, we, as residents of Michigan, have forgotten what that paragraph, and I'm going to read it one more time. What we do share, however, is a common philosophy that champions the rights of the individual and limits the power of the state. We do not exist to serve the state. The state exists to serve us. That distinction lies at the very heart of what it means to be an American. And I think our leaders have completely forgotten this fact. I'm going to continue. Why is this the idea? Why is this idea so important? Not merely for philosophical reasons, but for the best possible outcomes. Why do free societies produce so much more wealth and happiness than countries led by tyrannical governments? America has proven again and again and again and again that the spontaneous order of free people and free markets evolve far superior solutions to every human need and want. If you want to botch something up, just ask the government to take over. If you want efficient solutions at work, allow people to compete in a free market. That's why America has long led the world in the creation of wealth and innovation. That's why we produce the highest quality creative art, entertainment, design, and technology. And I just want to stop right there. I remember the day a friend of mine named Mike, and this was 2004, and we were leaving a card party, and he said to me in the car, "I didn't know you were a Republican." I said, "Well, I'm actually not a Republican, but why do you assume that I'm a Republican?" And he said, "Well, because you don't believe in the redistribution of wealth." And I thought to myself, well, that's a strange thing to hear coming from a person that is in the cement trade. You know, he's a mason kind of a guy. And I said, the redistribution of wealth has taken place in and through the United States of America on a more grand scale than the globe has ever known. That's how the redistribution of wealth has taken place, through the American system. Back to the article. But what about when we fail? Porter says, look back at all of our country's biggest blunders, and you won't find freedom or free markets. You'll find a government that has far overstepped its constitutional limits. It happens every single time when we allow our liberty to be taken from us in the name of political theory. Disaster will follow. Consider the Vietnam War, for example. Did Congress declare war as the Constitution requires? No. I remember it was a police engagement. Instead, the country was sold on yet another big lie, and it was a whopper. We were told that propping up a corrupt dictatorship in a tiny Asian nation was the key to stopping communism from spreading around the world. Meanwhile, without our involvement in that country's internal politics, no one in America would have ever known who Ho Chi Minh was, or even cared. And ironically, all we had to do to stop the spread of communism was simply leave it alone. Empty grocery store shelves and hopeless lives were the only bane needed to wipe out that stain virtually everywhere. Yes, some folks still seem determined to adopt those ideas and destroy their societies. Venezuela is an example. But we seem to have finally wised up to the fact that the only thing we have to do to make sure it fails is simply wait a decade or two. It's certainly nothing we're sending our kids to die over. And let me just say this. The idea that any of these socialist systems and or that leads, eventually they all lead to tyranny and authoritative. Even the suggestion of a socialized, a democratic socialist state. Like Canada, for example. What a disaster we have seen single-payer healthcare. It has completely overwhelmed that. Same thing in the other so-called, we need to look to every other industrialized first world nation has single-care healthcare for everybody. And we did not run out of hospital beds. We were able to mobilize private industry. The United States of America made a lot of mistakes, certainly, but our system has worked a lot better than the rest. Back to the article. And that brings me back to today. Should we all sit in our home prisons with our freedom to work, to associate, to speak taken away from us? All to universally support flattening a curve because we are all in this together? Or is this the public health services Vietnam? I have a prediction for you. By the time this virus is thoroughly understood, what will become extremely clear is that these shutdown orders did virtually nothing to stop the spread of the disease or to reduce its lethalness in the population. And let me just say this. So much has been said about, well, all these mitigating efforts that we've done has flattened the curve. The original estimates, the models, were saying 2 to 5 million dead, even with mitigating actions. And they keep revising this thing because it doesn't work out. And it reminds me of in 2000, earlier than sometime at the turn of the century, we had the signs that went up in Glacier National Park saying, enjoy the glaciers now because by 2020, these glaciers will be gone. And there's been a lot of that stuff said. Well, this past year, they're taking them down because the glaciers are still there. I guess the models were wrong. Back to the article. Why do you believe that, you would ask? Because it's apparent already that at least 5 times more people have been infected than are reflected in the number of confirmed cases, and the real number may be as much, much greater than that. And let me just say, the work that the doctors out of Stanford have been doing really suggests that it's between 50 and 100 times more contagious. So based on the numbers tonight, 700,000 plus people are confirmed. If it's just for simple math, so we've got a lot more people in the United States. If it's, 50 times, what is that? 35 million is actually had this virus. And I would hope that we do. I hope that is the case. Because it is less dangerous. It just makes us look bad. And a few podcasts ago, I asked, would we ever admit we were wrong? Would we ever admit that we were wrong for allowing this to happen to us? Not being able to go to church, not being able to go to work. Back to the article. In a town in Germany, one of the only places where a reliable statistical sampling has been done, 14% of the population has antibodies for the virus, which means they have already been infected. Germany has a population of 83 million. So that's more than 10 million people who have potentially already had the virus, and that's only in one country. Germany has also tested twice as many people per capita as we have, so they know far more about the actual spread of the virus and its real lethalness. So how dangerous is the virus? The official confirmed infected count in Germany is only 135,000, and almost 4,000 Germans have died because of this virus. That's a 3% case rate, mortality, that is. Out of the population that has been proven to be infected, about 3% have died. That sounds really bad and scary. After all, the average annual flu has a mortality rate between 0.1% and 0.2%, depending on the year. So, for example, in 2015 and 2016, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, estimates that 30 million people got the flu and around 60,000 people died. 30 million people got the flu and around 60,000 people died, or 0.2%. But wait, we know for sure that far more people have gotten this coronavirus than have been tested for it. As I just noted, the statistical sampling of antibodies in Germany suggests a much, much lower lethality rate. The real mortality rate is probably somewhere closer to the regular flu. So what So what do you want to bet that we eventually figure out that the population-wide mortality rate for this virus is about the same as all the other coronaviruses? But what if I'm wrong? And I might be, he says. We could be. Nobody knows how widespread the virus is already in the U.S., but since we don't know for sure, why in the world are we ordering everyone to stay in their homes? Why don't we find out and then decide? That's what a free society would do. Knowing the real lethality of the virus, which can only be calculated if you know how many people are infected, informs us of how dangerous the virus is for most people. We already know that the virus isn't a significant killer for people under 50. Virtually no one without serious existing conditions has died from the virus under the age of 50. Now, let me just stop right there. We have people in this country, young people in their 20s, teens and 20s, that have been vaping and they've died. So now all of a sudden we got to run out there and we've got to shut this thing down because people thought it was healthy. You're inhaling the smoke of a burning object. It's not healthy. It can have some health benefits to it if you do it in moderation. It's possible that those teens had underlying conditions, or maybe they just created it. Maybe they killed themselves. That's possible. It's still a decision that they made. Free will. Man, I like it. All right, back to the article. And we also know from places that have actual data that this coronavirus is no more dangerous than the other viruses that we know circulate around our country on a regular basis every year. Knowing how many people are infected is also critical to figuring out how many policies are needed to mitigate the impact of the disease on the hospital system. It never got as bad as we thought it was, and when it did, we built extra rooms, and again, back to free will. I want to be able to make the decisions that I want to be able to make. That's between me and God, if it kills me. And I don't want to hurt anybody else, ever. But I don't want the state telling me how I need to live and how I need to die. After all, if tens of millions of people already have the virus, you're not going to stop it by making people stay in their homes. It's already too late. I strongly suspect that was the case here. I suspect we will eventually learn that the virus had been circulating undetected in the U.S. since last December. I agree with him completely. And what is certainly different about this virus as compared to the regular flu is that when it emerged, there was zero existing immunity to it, which meant it spread like wildfire. But the good news is that super contagious viruses also burn out quicker because herd immunity impacts the growth rate. So, should we have shut down our entire economy for a month in March, and the end of March and part of April, long after the virus had spread to millions? No. What we're doing will not reduce the total infection rate or the mortality rates of this virus. How do I know? The best evidence is how widespread the virus has become because from studies of fecal matter in wastewater treatment plants. Ugh, sounds nasty. A group of researchers from Harvard, MIT, and Brigham and Women's Hospital and medtech startup company BioBot Analytics. It's pretty complicated. A lot of really smart people there. They published a research submitting that viral loads in the waste stream from an area in Boston suggest at least 2,300 people in the water treatment area are infected with COVID-19, roughly 5 times more than the official 446 confirmed cases. No one wants to go to a hospital or a doctor's office right now unless they absolutely have to, so it makes sense that the vast majority of these infections go unreported. And that's not all we know about how fast this virus spreads. Although nobody in Washington, D.C. wants to mention it, one group of people was thoroughly tested. This group offers a striking example of what happens when you lock people into their homes after the virus has been circulating amongst them. We know exactly how many people on the Diamond Princess cruise ship were infected. We know when the virus appeared on the boat, and we know exactly how many people died. There is no dispute about these facts whatsoever. There were 3,711 people on the boat, passengers and crew. We know that 712 people were infected, despite restricting everyone to their cabins as soon as the infection was discovered. That's an infection rate of almost 20% in a matter of days. This is a very, very contagious virus. Keep in mind the lockdown on the whole boat. After, as soon as that virus, the infection was discovered, and that's still an infection rate of almost 20% in a matter of days. This is a very, very contagious virus. Keep in mind the lockdown on the boat began on February 5th, which was only 4 days after the first case was discovered in Hong Kong. This virus spreads like wildfire. On the other hand, even in a population that is much, much older than average and that featured substantial population-wide comorbidities like high blood pressure and obesity, only 12 people died. That's 1.7% of the people who got infected. Yes, that's much higher than the average flu, but not if you adjust for age and relative health of the population. Researchers who have studied the cruise ship outbreak in detail estimate that this virus will have a 0.5 lethality in the general U.S. population, which is, again, comparable to the regular annual flu, although it is a bad flu season. We have already seen that the initial forecasts of more than 2 million deaths were complete nonsense. When the president ordered the economy to shut down, he claimed that if he didn't take this step of cowering in our homes, then millions would die. People would be dropping dead in the subway, Trump claimed, as though Ebola was on the loose. It's all bullshit. This virus is definitely dangerous to the old and the sick. To everyone else, it's going to be a non-event, just like any other flu season. Here's a prediction. In a bad year for the flu, between 50,000 and 100,000 Americans die from the virus. I'm willing to bet that by the end of this year, roughly the same number of people will have died from this virus. Now, I'm just going to say, that's if the paperwork is filled out correctly. We're hearing way too many reports that the CDC has suggested, regardless of death, it is COVID-19. And we also know that if you admit a COVID-19 patient, this is according to Dr. Jensen in Minnesota, if you admit a COVID-19 patient, you get $8,000. If you put them into ICU, you get $36,000. And so this is a lot about the money. Back to the article. And I'm willing to bet that there's zero difference in either the total per capita number of who become infected and the mortality rate between our country, which ordered a shutdown, and Sweden's, which has refused to order anyone to shut down their business or stay in their homes. If you accept that the virus had been circulating in our population for months, by the time the lockdown orders arrived, which is certainly the case, and if you know it's highly contagious, then ordering everyone into their homes in mid-March was closing the barn door when the horses were already long gone. What does work to control the spread of a novel virus? Herd immunity. Humans have immune systems. They work great, especially in younger people. We can handle viruses. What we should do is tell older and sicker people to put on a mask, wear rubber gloves, avoid crowds at all times, avoid hospitals, stay at home whenever you can, wash your hands as much as possible. We should have told everyone else, go about your lives. Yes, we should also add that some of you, probably about 20%, are going to get this novel coronavirus this year. Normally, about 90% of the population gets the flu every year. So your chances of catching COVID-19 this year are about double what you'd normally face with the regular flu. And if you get it, it's probably going to suck. But the younger you are and the healthier you are, the more likely it is you won't have any symptoms at all. So let's not cancel school. Let's let the kids go to and get exposed to this virus when they are young, when they can handle it, and when they can quickly develop immunity. That's the best way to build the herd immunity we need. Allow everyone who can manage the virus to get exposed as quickly as possible. After all, the sooner the herd immunity we need develops naturally, the safer we will all be. If the media hadn't gotten a hold of this story and if our political leaders hadn't panicked, this year would have been just like a really bad flu season, nothing more. And whether you agree with me or not, one thing is certain, hiding in our homes will not make us any safer, not for long. As soon as we leave our isolation, the virus will spread again. There's no way to stop a virus that's this contagious and this widespread in a population this large. It will take at least a year to build a vaccine, and until then, what we desperately need is for people who aren't at risk of dying to expose themselves and build immunity. And guess what? That's exactly what's going to happen eventually. The only question is, it can happen. Only question is when. It can happen 6 months from now if we want to cripple our economy, lose 10 trillion or 20 trillion plus all of our liberties, or it can happen in about 6 weeks if we all go back to work and deal with it like adults. So what should we do? Well, if you're over 60 and you're in poor health, by all means, you should do everything you can to avoid catching the flu this year. The hospitals aren't going to be able to help you. You have to make sure you don't get sick. But if you're in good health, and especially if you're under 50, simply ignore everything and live a normal life. It's no big deal. Interestingly, if we had respected people's civil liberties, that's almost certainly what would have happened. A lot of people would have gotten sick at first because nobody knew a new virus was circulating. But as soon as people saw what was happening, the old and the sick would have taken much greater precautions. The rest of us would have gotten exposed, probably about 20% of the population in 60 to 90 days, and then it would have burned out as immunity in the population grew, just like the regular flu. Meanwhile, there are tens of millions more people who have far more to fear from the economic consequences, these policies, than they have from the viruses. And guess what? There's no way to develop immunity from the state. The situation is a precedent that will surely be exploited for years to come. The government's getting used to ordering us around. It isn't going to stop. Meanwhile, God gave us the ability to reason, to judge for ourselves what risks to take and which to avoid. God also gave us all the liberty to live our lives as we see fit. Our leaders don't have the right to make these choices for us. When we let them, we doom our country to the worst possible outcomes. Just imagine what John Hancock, John Henry, or Paul Revere would say to themselves in our current situation. Do you have any idea what our founding fathers were up against? They took on the greatest army in the world with little more than a bunch of starving farmers. They had no navy against the greatest navy in the world. They didn't even have the support of all Americans, and if they lost, they would have all been hanged for treason. Why take on these terrible odds? For liberty, to establish the greatest society the world has ever seen, a grand experiment to find out how much better our world could become with civil rights for the common man and free markets. And what do you think these men would say today, watching a governor ordering millions of people to stay locked up in their apartments while their businesses fail? Can you imagine what our founders would say, looking at us cowering in our homes like whipped dogs? I guess we've all forgotten about Valley Forge, where 2/3 of our soldiers died because of the flu. Trust me, they didn't have ventilators either. But did George Washington go home? Hell no. If our country's willingness to kowtow to the most blatantly unconstitutional orders in the history of our nation doesn't bother you because you still believe in the common good or because you buy into the big lie that we're all in this together, I think you should be ashamed of yourself. First, because you're naive to have any faith at all in our leaders' ability and willingness to make good decisions. They don't even know how many people have the virus already, and they never bothered to find out. They've completely ignored the Diamond Princess cruise case study, the German data, the wastewater studies. They're doing the only thing they can with the very limited understanding of the virus, ordering everyone to stay home. Meanwhile, plenty of good information is being denied. Plenty of hard evidence shows why this strategy won't work and it isn't necessary. But beyond all the facts and all the medicine, there's another reason I believe every American ought to be ashamed of the way our government has behaved. We acted just like the communists in China behaved, ordering everyone around, telling them they can't travel, telling them they can't work. That ain't what we do here. By all means, if you want to wear a mask, be my guest. And if you are older or if you have health problems, please take sensible precautions. But those decisions are rightfully yours to make. We aren't in this together. You have your health and your priorities, and I've got mine. I hope you'll join me in calling out anyone who supports these tyrannical and unconstitutional new laws. I believe every American should willingly risk death before surrendering an iota of his liberty. And quote C.S. Lewis, "Of all tyrannies, a tyranny exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. Those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience." I had to read the whole article because I couldn't sum it up any better than Porter did. I'm going to get into some more stuff tomorrow. I hope that this makes an impact. I'm James Detroit, and I'm out.